College football and the NCAA are currently playing both sides of the same coin. Individual athletes get paid, while major football programs generate massive amounts of revenue. Power 4 teams make astronomical amounts of money, exert control over players, and operate in a paid NIL environment. This brings us to the core contradiction facing the sport today. Either college players, specifically football players, are employees or they're not. You can't switch between those positions depending on what protects institutional revenue. If you've been paying any attention during the first few weeks of the offseason, you probably noticed that this conversation centers around Colorado football and Coach Deion Sanders. This situation exposes the contradiction that teams and the NCAA are now manipulating. Coach Prime announced a disciplinary schedule of fines for being late, missing meetings, or even skipping film sessions. And these fines range anywhere from $500 to $2,500. Now this goes beyond traditional punishment like hill sprints. We're talking about taking away a 19-year-old's rent money. Whether that money is directly withheld from NIL payments or enforced by the school itself is still unconfirmed. But the point remains the same. Young adults are being fined under the banner of discipline while tied to participation in a Power 4 football program. Here lies the deeper problem. The NCAA does not deem college football players as employees, and schools as well as conferences make this abundantly clear. So clear, in fact, that since 2019, the NCAA and Power 4 conferences have poured more than $15 million into lobbying efforts to preserve the non-employee status of college athletes. One of their explicit goals has been to push federal law that defines college athletes as anything but employees of their schools. This position is not accidental or passive, it is actively defended at the highest levels. At the same time, it's important to understand that NIL money is not school money. We're talking about third parties paying players through collectives, boosters, and sponsors. For example, Miami is not directly paying Darian Mensah unless it is through a revenue share system. NIL was introduced as a workaround to athlete compensation, allowing money to flow to players without forcing schools or the NCAA to legally recognize them as employees. NIL was intentionally designed to be separate from wages, and in court cases so far, college football players have not been deemed employees. While this setup is obviously exploitative for players, schools insulate themselves by claiming athletes are simply students with external compensation. For years, schools hid behind the fact that they didn't pay players directly. Now some of them do, and they still refuse to treat players like employees. This brings us to how the current system actually functions. The NCAA governs college football, which includes 4 power conferences making billions in media and sponsorship revenue. At the same time, schools classify players as non-employees to avoid labor law, collective bargaining, and long-term health obligations. NIL acts as the workaround that gives money to players without changing the underlying power structure. The current system protects universities and the NCAA while placing nearly all the risk on the athletes, all the while insisting they are nothing more than students who just happen to make money. Given that reality, the question becomes unavoidable. If a school doesn't legally employ a player and doesn't pay that player directly, where does the authority come from to fine them? Coach Prime's proposition could very well end up in court, and while this hasn't been ruled illegal yet, that doesn't make it safe. This issue could be tested as soon as this fall. Colorado's internal team rules are not legal authority, and they certainly don't extend over third-party income, which is why contract law and labor law come into play whether Colorado wants to push that envelope or not. There are 2 sides to this debate. One side argues that, well, these are just athletes, not employees, a position that ultimately preserves exploitation. The other side looks at how college football programs operate day to day and sees a system that already resembles employment, with the law eventually catching up to reality. Both sides can exist in discussion, but really only one of them is sustainable long term. In professional sports like the NFL, this wouldn't even be a conversation. NFL players are employees, they have contracts, unions, and most importantly, a collective bargaining agreement. Everyone understands the rules surrounding discipline. College football players, by contrast, have none of that. No contracts, no union, and no collective bargaining agreement. Yet some still argue that this type of discipline is professional, even though it exerts employee-level control over athletes who have zero employee protections. This raises the obvious question of discipline itself. Whatever happened to punishment in the form of sprints or running the bleachers? If anything, this situation highlights flawed disciplinary practices. Legally, a coach can take away reps or playing time, but legally, a coach cannot fine players when the income doesn't come from the school. And this approach will not hold up in court, and there are other ways to foster discipline without crossing that line. So it begs the question, is Deion Sanders' discipline even sustainable itself? I mean, he's coming off a 3-9 season. Maybe he needs to look inwards. The impact of this system also isn't evenly distributed. A star player making hundreds of thousands might be annoyed by a fine, but it really won't change their life. Apply the same fine to a walk-on, and suddenly, well, that player is out of 2 months of rent. That punishment doesn't land the same way. For those players, there really is no appeal process, and there certainly is no bargaining power. Any system where the least powerful absorb the most risk is flawed from the top down. For decades, student athletes have been exploited for their labor. and the NCAA has fostered that reality. You can't expand control and punishment without expanding player protection. That is why employee status keeps coming up in college football. If schools want to treat players like employees through financial discipline, well then they need to accept the responsibility that comes with it: employee status, unions, and collective bargaining. Now, if you ask me, I don't really have the answer for what a player's union looks like. There's so many NCAA athletes, but what I do know is that the current system and the current setup isn't sustainable. If financial punishments are going to exist without employee status, then clear and uniform rules need to be written across the NCAA. Rules that limit coaching power and protect lower-tier players and walk-ons would also reduce the number of court cases. You can't have it both ways. As long as the NCAA acts like players are employees while pretending they aren't, these situations will keep happening, and eventually, the law will force a choice. Ultimately, this situation is bigger than Colorado or Deion Sanders. It highlights how flawed the NCAA system is and how it continues to exploit student athletes. The gap between someone like an Arch Manning or a walk-on makes that reality clear. The bottom-tier players are the ones who ultimately pay the price. College football and the NCAA now face a decision: accept that players are workers and grant them legal protections, or stop pretending there is authority to interfere with a student-athlete chasing a bag. You can't play both sides forever, and eventually, the courts will make the choice for you. I'm Cobalt Productions. Thank you for watching.